All right, let's get one thing straight. Haiti didn't colonize the Dominican Republic, but that's the story a lot of Dominicans were taught to believe. So, what really happened, and why is the truth so inconvenient for the people who still benefit from believing this? Let's get into it. This is what we're gonna break down: the island of Hispaniola. Let's start with the 1800s. In the 1800s, there was a status quo. In the Western Hispaniola, which is now known as Haiti, they were brutal enslaved people economy. There was a strict caste system, and there was a lot of revolutionary pressure to dismantle all of this because of the inhumane treatment happening there. On the eastern side of La Hispaniola, which is now known as Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, we had a weak Spanish rule, an elite led society, and slavery was still legal on that side. There was also a Catholic dominance there. Then, boom, in 1804, we have Haiti declare independence and abolish slavery and become the first Black republic in the world. But before all of that, there was a status quo that was being upheld in the entire island, regardless of whether you were in the eastern side or the western side. And that was anti Blackness and colorism, cultural fragmentation. One side was totally dominated by a French culture, and the other side was totally dominated by a Spanish culture. And there was also fear of Haiti's influence. Remember in the previous slide that there was a lot of revolutionary pressure, kind of like the kind that you can feel that tension. And that was all around the island. So they knew something was going to pop off. And that was what they feared, that revolutionary influence that was being felt through Haiti, and it was passing on to every part of La Hispaniola. And then came Jean-Pierre Boyer in 1822. Talk about Jean-Pierre Boyer, the Haitian president who marched into the eastern side of the island in 1822 with what looked like good intentions. He abolished slavery, he unified Hispaniola, so on paper he was the liberator. But history, like parenting, it's a little complicated. Boyer, to me, is like a well meaning but over controlling parent. The kind who says, I know what's best for you, then takes over your life so completely that you can't even breathe. Because, yes, he did something powerful, and we cannot take that away from him. He freed enslaved Dominicans. That's not a small thing. That is something that should be talked about more often and not ignored. Because let's face it, the elite in Santo Domingo weren't going to do it. They weren't going to free enslaved Dominicans, and Spain for sure was not going to do it. So Boyer, he forced it. He was like, I'm going to do it, and he did it. But here's the problem though. After he did it, he didn't trust Dominicans to rule themselves. So he replaced Spanish laws with Haitian ones. He dismantled the Catholic Church's control, which wasn't a bad thing, but didn't offer an alternative that fit the local culture or allow the locals to come up with their own. He did redistributed land, which sounds good, but mostly to Haitian officials. And then he governed the East from afar as if Dominicans couldn't be trusted with autonomy. And this wasn't colonization because he wasn't extracting wealth, but it was authoritarian. It was parental control on a national scale. And just like a child who grows up feeling smothered, Dominicans eventually rebelled, not because they hated freedom per se, but because they wanted to claim it on their own terms. So when we ask, was Boyer a hero or a villain? Maybe that's not the real question here. Maybe the question is, can liberation still feel like oppression when you're not given the choice to participate in it? And that's why Jean-Pierre Boyer's legacy to this day is mixed. Some hail him for abolition and unification, and others criticize him for suppressing Dominican culture and for burdening Haiti with debt. But I still feel like it goes deeper, way deeper than that metaphor that I use about an overprotective or overpowering parental figure. Because Jean Pierre Boyer, he disrupted power, not culture for the sake of control, but power. That's what he wanted to disrupt. Yes, he replaced the Spanish systems with Haitian law, and yes, the Catholic Church lost property. But it wasn't about destroying Dominican identity, it was about ending slavery and redistributing power. The redistribution of that power was not ethical, though. So there was a lot of things over here that were both wrong and right, or it started off wrong and it ended up right, or vice versa. But at the end of the day, he shook the status quo that we discussed before by doing this, because really the real backlash to everything that he did came from elites and clergy who lost their privileged status, not so much from poor Dominicans who gained their freedom. Who were the elites? Well, the elites back then, and I would say even now, were referred to as criollos, Spanish descended Dominican. The elites were mostly light skinned landowners of Spanish ancestry, wealthy merchants, cattle ranchers, and sugar producers. They were high ranking Catholic clergy and church aligned families, and educated men aligned with Spanish royalist ideals. And if you were an elite, you were in that inner circle, you had power. Some of the things that you had back then was land ownership, which equal wealth and social control. These families, they owned the largest states and haciendas. They controlled rural economies and could dictate labor systems, including the use of enslaved people. Ownership of land also meant control over food, trade routes, and local governance. So if you're starting to see it now, you're starting to see that these people have a lot to lose from Jean-Pierre Boyer coming through. They also had political authority. Elites often held political positions such as mayors, governors, colonial magistrates. Their allegiance to Spain gave them influence over colonial decision making and military defense. They had religious power as well via the Catholic Church. So they rubbed elbows with the Catholic Church because many elites were closely tied to the church, which functioned like a secondary government. Back then it was the church and the crown. Those were like the two stakeholders. And then those two stakeholders will mobilize military to do their bidding, but it was really the church and the crown that held most of the power. So yeah, the elite had close ties to the Catholic Church. The church controlled education, moral doctrine, record keeping, births, deaths, marriages, and public life. Religious leaders had enormous sway over the cultural and political identity of the colony. The church in Santo Domingo owned property, dictated public morality, and served as the ideological pillar of Spanish colonialism. The elite also had cultural dominance. They promoted Spanish customs, language, religion, and racial hierarchy as the only civilized way of life. So when the elites were like, you're erasing our culture, right? What they're saying is that you're erasing these Spanish customs that we have worked so hard to instill in the population here, and you're trying to take all of that away from us, right? Their identity was deeply invested as well in maintaining Spanishness and thus distancing themselves from African ancestry and Haitian blackness. So that's how they asserted that cultural dominance by saying, look at us, we are different because we are Spanish. You see what I'm saying? So that's why they were so distraught when Jean-Pierre Boyer came through, because he's like, no, we refuse to give up our Spanish customs. But these were Spanish elites saying that. And thus came the word invasion. And who called it an invasion? The term invasion comes from post independence Dominican elites who wrote the history books. So their narrative painted Haiti as a suppressor to justify Dominican nationalism, but it erased the full story of abolition, of unification efforts, and resistance to colonial rule. And just in case you were wondering, in case, the whole presentation thus far hasn't answered this, they resisted the Haitian occupation because Haiti's abolition of slavery hit their pockets directly. It hit their economic interests. Haitian law replaced Spanish legal systems, the systems that they implemented, that they upheld. And thus, when that goes away, it diminishes their local authority. Confiscation of church lands was seen as an attack on the church, and thus under cultural and spiritual power, because religion is part of culture. In short, the elite, they lost money, they lost power and identity control because of these things that were taken away from them when Jean-Pierre Boyer came through. And all the while, in the eastern side of La Hispaniola, there are rumblings, right? There are rumblings. And then this trio really comes to light. We have Los Padres de la Patria, and we'll talk about Juan Pablo Duarte primero. He was the visionary of the group. He was born to a wealthy Dominican merchant family of Spanish descent. He was educated in Europe, influenced by liberal Enlightenment ideals and nationalism. He founded what we all know as La Trinitaria in 1838, a secret society aimed at overthrowing Haitian rule and establishing an independent Dominican Republic. Juan Pablo Duarte, he advocated for a just democratic government free from tyranny, whether it came from Haiti or from Spain. He rejected offers to become king or dictator and was later exiled multiple times. We have Francisco del Rosario Sanchez. He was the radical. He was of mixed African and European ancestry, often referred to as a mulatto. Took charge of the independence movement when Duarte was exiled. He raised the flag for independence on February 27, 1844, in Santo Domingo. Francisco del Rosario Sanchez, he also later fought against Spanish recolonization in the Restoration War, and he was executed in 1861 after leading a failed uprising against the annexation of the DR back to Spain. Then we have Matias Ramon Mella, the tactician from a middle class background, skilled in strategy and military affairs. He was famous for firing the Trabucazo that marked the start of Dominican independence. So he was a middleman, Matias Ramon Mella. He was often seen as that bridge between Duarte's ideals and Sanchez's actions. He played a major role in organizing militias to defend the new republic. So, who were los padres de la patria. These three were not the elite Criollo landowners who benefited under Spanish rule. No, they opposed Haitian occupation not because they wanted to restore Spanish dominance, but because they envisioned a sovereign Dominican nation that served all its people, especially Sanchez, who embodied a challenge to both anti Haitian racism and elite dominance. So, what does this mean? It means that as Dominicans, reclaiming our story means facing hard truths. We can be proud of our independence without romanticizing colonial systems or demonizing Haiti. Real power comes in seeing our full story. And this is just a bit of it that shows the abolitionist side that sometimes we miss, the unification that sometimes we miss from our stories when it comes to how the Dominican Republic and Haiti came to be. And at the end of the day, our full story goes beyond that. It includes African, Indigenous, and Spanish, and beyond. And that story is still unfolding through us. We get to continue to write it, and we don't have to write it by demonizing our neighbors. And we should start looking at this story as a whole. We definitely need to drop the whole colonize. Haiti did not colonize the Dominican Republic, nor did they try to. We can call that an occupation if you want to call it something, but colonize, no. We're really just utilizing that word wrong for the sake of villainizing our neighbor, right? Who really colonized us was the Spanish, and who colonized Haiti was the French. So those are the ones that get that word, you know. We use these words, we villainize our neighbor, we just take out certain things of this complete story in order to fit a narrative that the powerful elites from back in the 1800s started, based off of their disgruntledness, their hate towards Jean-Pierre Boyer, who shook the tree, really, and took away some of the power that they had, right? The power that they had through the Catholic Church, the power that they had through the crown of Spain. But I think Jean-Pierre Boyer started something. He woke up that side that will soon be the Dominican Republic, right? He woke us up, he freed us, and then he woke us up so that way we can go after our freedom ourselves. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we're missing from this story. We're pointing fingers at a side that we shouldn't be pointing fingers towards. And that's why I think we gloss over certain things because it's best for us, because it's what we know, to uphold what the Spanish elite has taught us for a very long time, since the 1800s, that to be Dominican is to abide by Spanish culture and is to align ourselves to Spanish culture and everything that they taught us, and separate ourselves from the African legacy, from that revolutionary energy that they were so fearful of, that was coming from Haiti. And they ingrained that in us. And now we have intertwined Spanish culture as Dominican culture. It's not right to abide by that. It's not right to continue to uphold that based on the fear mongering that occurred back in 1800s, because it was the Spanish elite was so fearful of an uprising that will take away their livelihoods, their power, everything that they have quote unquote worked so hard for, but really just use free labor to gain. You know what I'm saying? And that was to separate us from our neighbors. They divided us. That's how they were able to conquer us. Okay? Because by saying, you know what? Y'all on this side, y'all are Spanish. Y'all are better than them because you're Spanish, you know? And that's what makes you Dominican. So when we internalize that, we base our entire identity on just that part of our legacy. But there's so much more to that. So much more. We have Taino, we have our African legacy as well, that we can embrace. And I say we don't embrace it because if we did, we wouldn't look at the Eastern side with such hatred, because we will be able to see that mixed heritage in them as if they are a mirror of us, because they are.